I should have known something was wrong when the coffee tasted like liquid gold. The cafe where I sat that afternoon wasn't the kind of place a broke nursing student could afford on her own. Polished marble counters, velvet chairs, the sort of establishment where people wore watches worth more than my semester tuition. But Mrs. Harlow had insisted on meeting here, and when someone offers to pay for your overpriced latte along with the promise of a job that could solve all your problems, you don't argue about the venue. I watched her through the steam rising from my cup. She was elegant in that effortless way wealthy women always seem to be. Her silver hair swept into a chignon, her suit tailored to perfection. Everything about her screamed money and power, from her practiced smile to the way she'd already ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Like and subscribe if you love Listen These Stories. Miss Torres, she said, sliding a folder across the table. I've reviewed your application, and I believe you're exactly what the family is looking for. My heart kicked against my ribs. I'd sent out dozens of applications for babysitting jobs, tutoring gigs, anything that would help me scrape together next month's rent and keep me enrolled. The eviction notice was already taped to my apartment door. I had 5 days. The position is residential, Mrs. Harlow continued, her manicured fingers tapping the folder. You'd be living on the estate in Port Venera, serving as guardian and companion to a 9-year-old girl. Her parents passed away recently, and her guardian wants someone with medical training, someone who can provide both care and emotional support during this difficult transition. Port Venera. Even the name sounded expensive. It was the wealthy enclave on the opposite side of the city, where mansions hid behind iron gates and security cameras, where people like me only entered to clean houses or deliver packages. The salary is $30,000 a month, she added, watching my reaction. Plus room and board, full benefits, and performance bonuses. I nearly choked on my coffee. $30,000. That was more than I'd make in 6 months at any normal job. It was enough to pay off my debts, finish school, maybe even help my mom with her medical bills. It was enough to change everything, but nothing that good comes without strings. What's the catch? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Harlow's smile didn't waver. The family values privacy. You'd be required to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. No personal phone calls from the estate, limited contact with the outside world, and absolute discretion about the household and its members. The guardian is a very private man, Miss Torres. He has enemies, business rivals who wouldn't hesitate to use information against him. Security is paramount. Something cold slithered down my spine, but I pushed it away. Rich people were paranoid about their privacy. That wasn't unusual, and for $30,000 a month, I could handle a little isolation. Who is the guardian? I asked. You'll meet him once you've signed the preliminary agreements. She opened the folder and produced a stack of papers, each page dense with legal text. The NDA, background check authorization, and security clearance forms. Standard procedure. I picked up the pen she offered, feeling its weight in my palm. My hands were shaking slightly as I flipped through the pages. The language was intimidating, full of legal jargon about confidentiality, breach of contract, financial penalties that made my eyes water. But buried underneath all of it was that number. $30,000 a month, 5 days until eviction, 3 weeks until my tuition was due, my mother's medication running out. I signed. Mrs. Harlow gathered the papers with practiced efficiency, tucking them back into the folder with a satisfaction that should have warned me. Perfect. A car will collect you tomorrow evening at 6. Pack for an extended stay. You won't need to return to your apartment for quite some time. And Miss Torres? She leaned forward, her expression suddenly serious. Once you enter that house, there's a protocol to follow. Trust the process. Mr. Voss has his reasons for every rule. The name hit me like a slap. Voss? As in Adrian Voss? Everyone in the city knew that name, even if they pretended not to. Adrian Voss was a ghost story told in whispers, a legend built on rumors of organized crime, political corruption, and violence, dressed in expensive suits. Some said he controlled half the city's underground economy. Others claimed he was just a successful businessman whose competitors spread vicious lies. No one knew the truth because no one who crossed him lived long enough to tell it, and I'd just agreed to live in his house. Mrs. Harlow stood, smoothing her suit. 6 o'clock, Miss Torres. Don't be late. And remember you signed an agreement. Breaking it would be inadvisable. She left me sitting there with an empty coffee cup and a choice I'd already made, but was only now beginning to regret. The next evening, I stood on the curb outside my apartment building with a single duffel bag and a stomach full of acid. The eviction notice still hung on my door, like a reminder of why I was doing this. Desperation makes cowards of us all, and I was desperate enough to walk into a viper's nest if it meant survival. The car arrived exactly at 6. A black sedan with tinted windows so dark I couldn't see inside. The back door opened, and that's when I heard it for the first time. A voice that would change everything. "Get in, Mrs. Torres." Not Miss. Mrs. I should have run. Instead, I got in. The drive to Port Venera took 40 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another world. The city streets gave way to tree-lined roads, then to walls and gates, and finally to a private drive that seemed to go on forever. When the mansion finally appeared through the trees, I forgot how to breathe. It was a fortress, disguised as a palace, all white stone and tall windows, with manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than my entire existence. Security cameras tracked our approach from every angle. Armed guards stood at attention near the entrance, their suits doing nothing to hide the weapons at their hips. This wasn't a home, it was a compound. The driver, who hadn't spoken a word during the entire journey, opened my door. I stepped out onto gravel that crunched under my worn sneakers, feeling painfully out of place in my thrift store jeans and jacket. A woman in a crisp uniform appeared at the entrance, the head housekeeper, I'd later learn, and gestured for me to follow. Inside was even more intimidating. Marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers. Artwork that probably belonged in museums hung on walls painted in soft, expensive colors. Everything was beautiful and cold and perfect, like a movie set waiting for actors to bring it to life. "Miss Torres," the housekeeper said, her accent clipped and professional. "I'm Mrs. Chen. I'll show you to the nursery wing. Miss Sophia is expecting you." We climbed a grand staircase, walked down corridors that seemed to stretch forever, and finally stopped at a door painted pale pink. "Mrs. Chen" knocked softly before opening it. The room inside was a child's dream, filled with toys, books, a canopy bed draped in white lace. But the little girl sitting on the window seat looked anything but happy. She was small for 9, with dark hair pulled into careful braids and eyes that had seen too much grief. She clutched a photograph to her chest, and even from across the room, I could see it was a woman, her mother, I assumed. "Sophia, Mrs. Chen said gently. "This is Miss Torres. She'll be staying with you." The girl looked at me with an expression far too old for her face. "Are you going to leave too?" The question hit me in the chest. I crossed the room and knelt down to her level, keeping my voice soft. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to stay right here and keep you company. We're going to read books and play games and maybe even bake cookies if Mrs. Chen lets us use the kitchen. How does that sound?" For a moment, her expression didn't change. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. "Uncle Adrian doesn't like strangers near me. He says people can't be trusted." Uncle Adrian, the ghost of the house, the man I still hadn't met. "Well," I said, forcing a smile, "I guess we'll have to show him I'm not just any stranger. Deal?" She didn't smile back, but she nodded. It was something. I spent the next few hours with Sophia, learning that she loved drawing but wouldn't show me her pictures, that she had nightmares about the accident that killed her parents, that she recited rules in her sleep. Don't open the curtains. Don't answer questions. Don't trust anyone Uncle Adrian hasn't approved. This child was living in a beautiful prison, and I was starting to realize I'd just joined her. It was nearly 8 when I felt the shift in the house. The staff moved differently, spoke in lower voices. Even Sophia tensed, her small body going rigid. "He's home," she whispered. The door to the nursery opened without a knock, and Adrian Voss walked into the room like he owned not just the house, but the very air we breathed. I'd expected someone intimidating. The rumors had prepared me for that. What I hadn't expected was how completely he would dominate a space just by existing in it. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than a car, but it was his face that stopped me cold. Sharp features, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes so dark they looked black in the dim light. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a reminder that his power had been earned, not inherited. He looked at Sophia first, his expression softening in a way that was almost shocking. "Time for bed, little one." She obeyed immediately, climbing under the covers without protest. He kissed her forehead with a tenderness that didn't match the predator I was looking at, then turned those black eyes on me. "My office. Now." It wasn't a request. I followed him through the mansion, trying to memorize the route but losing track after the third turn. He walked like violence contained in human form, each step purposeful and precise. Staff members practically dissolved into the walls to avoid him. His office was exactly what I expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gardens and, beyond them, the lights of the city. The desk was massive, and sitting on it was a stack of papers that made my stomach drop. "Sit," he said, moving behind the desk. I sat. He studied me for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Mrs. Harlow says you're qualified. Nursing student, top of your class, no criminal record, no family complications. Clean." "I'm good with children," I offered, trying to ignore how small his stare made me feel. "Sophia needs stability, routine, someone who won't disappear in the night or sell stories to the press. Your life is about to change significantly, Miss Torres. Before we proceed, I need you to understand the terms of your employment." He slid the papers across the desk. They were different from what I'd signed at the cafe, heavier, more official. I recognized some of the sections: confidentiality, security protocols, emergency procedures. But there were pages and pages I hadn't seen before, clauses buried in legal language that I didn't understand. "This formalizes your role," Adrian said, producing a pen. "It's for your protection as much as mine. You'll be living under my roof, in my world. That comes with certain requirements." A man in an expensive suit appeared at the door, a lawyer, based on his briefcase and calculating expression. He nodded at Adrian and took a position by the window, silent but present. "I don't understand," I said, flipping through the pages. "Mrs. Harlow said I was hired as a guardian for Sophia. This looks like..." "A contract of guardianship," Adrian finished, "which includes you in the family structure. It's necessary for legal purposes, insurance, security clearances. Sign it, and you'll have full authority to make decisions regarding Sophia's welfare. Refuse, and I'll have to find someone else." The threat was subtle but clear. I needed this job. He knew it. I knew it. And the lawyer standing by the window definitely knew it. I picked up the pen. Which parts do I need to initial? Just the signature page. The rest is standard. Something in my gut screamed that this was a mistake, but the rational part of my brain, the part that remembered my overdue bills and eviction notice, pushed the doubts away. I flipped to the last page and found the signature line, my hand hovering over it. "It's for protection," Adrian said again, his voice almost gentle. "Nothing in this contract harms you, Miss Torres. I give you my word." I signed. The lawyer collected the papers immediately, producing a stamp and seal from his briefcase. Adrian watched the entire process with an expression I couldn't read, something that might have been satisfaction or regret, or both. "Welcome to the family," he said quietly. "You should pack your belongings from the guest room. You'll be staying in the East Wing now." "The East Wing?" "The family wing." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Mrs. Chen will show you. There's a wardrobe already prepared. Your measurements were taken from your application photos. Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." He was halfway to the door when I found my voice. "Mr. Voss? Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let Sophia down." He paused, his hand on the doorframe. When he looked back at me, his expression was unreadable. "No, Miss Torres, you won't, because if you do, there'll be consequences that extend far beyond unemployment." He left me sitting there, the phantom warmth of the pen still in my hand, wondering what I'd actually just signed. I found out the next morning. Mrs. Chen led me to a suite that was easily twice the size of my old apartment: bedroom, sitting room, and bathroom, all decorated in shades of cream and gold. The wardrobe she opened was filled with clothes that definitely weren't mine. Designer dresses, tailored pants, silk blouses, all in my exact size. On the dresser sat a small velvet box. "Mr. Voss wanted you to have this," Mrs. Chen said, her expression carefully neutral. Inside the box was a ring. Not just any ring, a diamond so large it looked like a prop from a movie, set in platinum that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the walls. My hands went numb. "What is this?" "Your wedding ring, Mrs. Voss." The world tilted. "My what?" Mrs. Chen's expression finally cracked, showing something that might have been pity. "You signed the contract last night. Clause 12, the guardianship marriage provision. It's binding and legal. As of midnight, you became Mr. Voss's wife." I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up. When the dizziness passed, I stormed through the mansion, ignoring Mrs. Chen's protests, ignoring the startled looks from the staff, following the sound of Adrian's voice, until I found him in a glass-walled room that looked like a command center screens, showing security feeds, phones ringing, men in suits discussing something in rapid-fire Italian. They all went silent when I burst through the door. "Get out," Adrian said to his men, not taking his eyes off me. They left. I slammed the velvet box onto the table between us. "What the hell is this?" He glanced at the ring, then back to me, his expression infuriatingly calm. "Your wedding ring. I had it designed specifically for you. I didn't agree to marry you. You signed the contract. I signed a guardianship agreement." Read closer next time. He stood, moving around the table with that predatory grace that made my survival instincts scream. Clause 12, paragraph 3. Any guardian of Sophia Voss must be legally bound to the family through marriage or blood adoption. It's the only way to ensure her safety and your authority to act on her behalf. You wanted to protect her, this is how. I couldn't breathe. You tricked me. I protected you. His voice was soft but edged with steel. The moment you walked into this house, you became a target. My enemies would use you to get to Sophia, to get to me. But as my wife, you're untouchable. No one would dare harm you without starting a war they can't win. I want out. Annul it. Dissolve it. Whatever you have to do. No. The single word landed like a death sentence. You can't keep me here. I can, and I will. He took another step closer, and I realized I'd backed myself against the wall. You signed a legal contract, Miss Torres. Or should I say, Mrs. Voss. That piece of paper makes you my wife in the eyes of the law, the church, and every criminal organization between here and the Atlantic. You're mine now, not because I want a bride, but because it's the only way to keep you alive. Tears burned in my eyes. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does. Something flickered across his face, almost too quick to catch. But you're here now, and running would only get you killed. Stay, play your part, and you'll have everything you need. Money, security, protection. Refuse, and you're on your own against people who will do things to you that make death look merciful. He picked up the velvet box and took out the ring. Before I could protest, he caught my left hand and slid the diamond onto my finger. It fit perfectly, of course. He'd thought of everything. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a touch that was almost gentle. "They can't touch you now," he said quietly. "You're under my protection. That means something in this world." I looked down at the ring, at the weight of it on my hand, at the way it caught the light like a beautiful shackle. When I looked back up, Adrian was still close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough that I could smell his cologne, expensive and dangerous. "So tell me, Mrs. Voss," he murmured, and I hated how the title sounded natural in his voice, like he'd been calling me that for years instead of hours. "How long before you run?" I wanted to tell him I'd already mentally packed my bags. I wanted to slap him, scream at him, demand my freedom. But standing there in his orbit, feeling the strange pull of whatever dark gravity surrounded him, I could only manage one word: never. It was a lie. At least, I thought it was. The next few days taught me that the Voss mansion wasn't a home, it was a fortress, and I was both prisoner and protected. Every room had cameras, every exit had guards. I couldn't make a phone call without it being monitored, couldn't leave the grounds without an armed escort, couldn't even check my email without someone named Marco Adrian's tech specialist logging every keystroke. The rules were delivered by Mrs. Chen with clinical efficiency. No speaking to the press, no sharing details about the household, no leaving Adrian's sight during public appearances. I was to dress according to a wardrobe selected for me, attend events when summoned, and smile convincingly whenever someone addressed me as Mrs. Voss. I was a prop in a performance I hadn't auditioned for, but Sophia needed me, and that made the cage bearable. She started sleeping better with me nearby, started drawing pictures she'd actually show me, started laughing at my terrible jokes. Watching her slowly come back to life made every humiliation worth it. Almost. The staff whispered around me, treating me with a deference that felt wrong. I was 25 years old, a college dropout, living in a crime lord's mansion, wearing his ring and his name like borrowed clothes. But to them, I was Mrs. Voss, and that title carried weight I didn't understand yet. It was a guard named Marcus who finally explained it to me. I'd found him standing outside my door one evening, and after enough pestering, he'd agreed to walk with me through the gardens under supervision, of course. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, keeping his voice low. "This isn't a home. This is a front line. And you're not just some babysitter, you're leverage. You're a statement. You're the thing that makes Mr. Voss look human to the world." "I'm a prisoner," I corrected. "You're alive," he shot back. "And in this world, that's more than most people in your position can say. The last woman who got close to Sophia ended up in the harbor. You want to know why you're watched? Because you're being protected, Mrs. Voss. Don't mistake a cage for a coffin." That night, I lay in my enormous bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the mansion settling. Somewhere in this fortress, Adrian was awake. I'd learned he barely slept, always working, always planning, always 3 steps ahead of whatever threat was coming next. I heard it then, through the walls, Sophia crying in her sleep, and Adrian's voice, low and soothing, comforting his niece through another nightmare. The tenderness in his tone made my chest ache. This man who'd trapped me, who'd bound me to him with legal contracts and threats. He was also the man who sat up all night making sure a little girl felt safe. I fell asleep with the ring still on my finger, too exhausted to hate him anymore. The next evening, I learned that sharing a meal with the devil could be surprisingly pleasant. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 30 but was set for just 3. Adrian at the head of the table, Sophia to his right, and a place for me on his left. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, food that looked like art. Sophia was talking about her day, telling Adrian about the book I'd read to her, and he listened like she was delivering a presidential address. "Lena does the voices," Sophia said, her eyes bright. She made the dragon sound really scary. Adrian's gaze slid to me. "Did she?" "It wasn't that impressive," I muttered, cutting into my salmon. "I think Miss Torres is too modest." There was something in his voice that made my skin warm amusement, maybe, or approval. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Sophia hasn't been this animated in months. For a moment, the tension between us eased. We talked about small things. Sophia's lessons, the gardens, a charity gala coming up that I apparently had to attend. Adrian's attention was intoxicating when it wasn't threatening. He asked questions like he actually cared about the answers, made observations that showed he paid attention to details most people missed. I almost forgot he'd blackmailed me into marriage. Then Sophia excused herself to wash up, and we were alone. "You're good with her," Adrian said, refilling my wine glass. "Better than I expected. I care about her. That's the difference between me and whoever you hired before. The woman before you lasted 3 days before she tried to sell photos to a tabloid." His expression darkened. "She's no longer a problem." I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. "Why do you do this?" I asked instead, gesturing vaguely at the opulence around us. "All of this. If it's as dangerous as you say, why not just walk away? Take Sophia somewhere safe. Start over." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Walk away from what? From who I am? There's no starting over when you're born into this life, Mrs. Voss. My father built this empire, and when he died, it became mine. Walking away would create a power vacuum that would collapse half the city. How many people would die in the chaos? Hundreds? Thousands? No, I stay because leaving would be more dangerous than remaining. That's a lonely way to live. It's the only way I know how." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes, regret, maybe, or exhaustion. "You asked about the scar once. You want to know how I got it?" I nodded. "My brother." The words were quiet, heavy. We disagreed about how to handle a rival family. He thought negotiation was weakness. I thought violence would start a war. I was right, but by the time I realized how far he'd gone, it was too late. He attacked me, thinking if he eliminated me, he'd take control. Instead, he got himself killed, and I got this. His finger traced the line of the scar, a gesture that looked automatic, like he didn't realize he was doing it. "Sophia's his daughter," I said, the pieces clicking together. "Yes, and she's the only family I have left. So, when I say I'll do anything to protect her, including forcing a stranger into a fake marriage, I mean it. Your comfort doesn't factor into the equation." He should have sounded like a monster. Instead, he just sounded tired. I reached across the table, not thinking, just reacting to the pain I heard in his voice. My fingers brushed his wrist, and electricity sparked between us. His eyes met mine, and for a breathless second, the space between us felt charged with something dangerous and inevitable. Then he pulled away. "Some questions, Mrs. Voss," he said softly, standing and buttoning his jacket. "Draw blood. Don't forget that." He left me sitting there, my hand still outstretched, wondering when I'd started caring about his pain more than my own. The warning came 3 days later, and it came in flowers. I was in the garden with Sophia, watching her chase butterflies, when Marcus appeared at the gate with a single black rose in his hand. His face was pale, his expression grim. "Get inside," he said. "Now." "What's wrong?" "Inside. Bring the girl." I gathered Sophia, who protested about leaving the sunshine, and hurried into the house. Within minutes, the mansion became a hive of activity, guards sealing doors, checking windows, staff members disappearing into safe rooms. Adrian appeared from somewhere, his suit jacket off, a gun at his hip that he didn't bother to hide. He took the black rose from Marcus and stared at it like it was a live grenade. "When?" he asked. 30 minutes ago. Left at the north gate with this." Marcus handed him a bullet casing, and I watched Adrian's jaw tighten. "The Corsini mark. Take Sophia to her room and lock the door." Adrian's eyes found mine. "You too. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What's happening?" "They know about you," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before: fear. "They know you're here. They know what you mean to Sophia, and now they're testing me, seeing if I'll protect you or sacrifice you. Stay in the house, Mrs. Voss. Out there, you're not safe anywhere else." I wanted to ask more, wanted to understand who they were, and why a flower and a bullet were enough to turn the mansion into a war zone. But Adrian was already moving, barking orders in Italian and English, orchestrating a defense against an enemy I couldn't see. Sophia clung to me as I carried her upstairs, and I felt the weight of my new reality settle over me like a shroud. This wasn't a job. This wasn't even a marriage. This was survival, and the rules were written in blood. Through my window, I watched Adrian in the courtyard, surrounded by armed men, his posture radiating controlled violence. He was in his element out there, the heir, the boss, the predator I'd married without knowing what teeth he had. And despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the cage he'd locked me in, I felt something dangerous bloom in my chest. I was starting to understand him. Worse, I was starting to care. That was when I knew I was in real trouble. The charity gala arrived like an execution date. I stood in my bedroom. Our bedroom, technically, though Adrian had never once set foot in it, staring at the dress hanging on the door. It was stunning. Midnight blue silk that caught the light like water. A neckline that was modest but somehow devastating. A designer label I couldn't pronounce. Shoes that cost more than my old rent. Jewelry that probably required its own security team. Mrs. Chen had laid everything out with military precision, and the message was clear. Tonight, I wasn't just Lena Torres playing dress-up. Tonight, I was Mrs. Adrian Voss, and the whole city would be watching. The makeup artist and hairstylist arrived at 4. By 6, I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. She looked elegant, composed, like she belonged in Adrian's world. Only the terror in her eyes gave her away. Adrian came to collect me at 7, and I heard my breath catch. He was devastating in a tuxedo, all sharp lines and dangerous elegance. His hair swept back in a way that showed off the scar I'd learned to stop asking about. When his eyes swept over me, something flickered in their depths. Approval, possession, maybe both. "You look perfect," he said, offering his arm. "I feel like a fraud." "Then you're already halfway to fitting in. Come on, the car is waiting." The gala was held at the Grand Monarch Hotel, a palace of marble and gold where Port Venera's elite gathered to pretend they weren't all criminals or crime-adjacent. Adrian kept me close as we entered, his hand on the small of my back, a touch that looked protective but felt like ownership. Every eye in the room turned to us. I'd known Adrian was important, but I hadn't understood what that meant until I watched people's reactions. Some smiled with too many teeth. Others went pale. A few actually stepped back, creating space around us like we carried a contagious disease. And all of them, every single one, looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity that made my skin crawl. "Smile," Adrian murmured against my ear. "You're doing beautifully. I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp." Just stay close, follow my lead, and don't answer questions about Sophia or the family. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, tell me immediately. We moved through the crowd like royalty, Adrian shaking hands and making small talk while I plastered on a smile and tried not to hyperventilate. People introduced themselves with names I forgot instantly, congratulated us on our marriage with voices full of calculation, asked invasive questions about how we met, that Adrian deflected with practiced ease. Then I saw him. The man was older, silver-haired, with eyes like a snake, and a smile that made my survival instincts scream. He approached us with the confidence of someone who feared nothing, and I felt Adrian's hand tighten on my waist. "Voss," the man said, his accent thick and Eastern European. "And this must be the new Mrs. Voss. Congratulations. You look real enough." "Dmitri," Adrian replied, his voice pleasant but edged with warning. "I didn't know the Corsini family was invited. We go where the money is." Dmitri's eyes raked over me like I was merchandise. "Tell me, does she know what she's married into? Or is she another pretty prop you'll discard when the novelty wears off?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Adrian cut me off. "My wife is not your concern, and I'd suggest you remember that before your curiosity becomes inconvenient." The temperature around us dropped 10 degrees. Other conversations stopped. Guards subtly shifted positions. I realized I was watching the start of something that could turn violent with one wrong word. Dmitri smiled wider. "Of course. No disrespect intended. I was simply admiring your taste. She's lovely. I hope she survives the season." He walked away, and I felt like I could finally breathe. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one you need to worry about." Adrian guided me toward the dance floor, where couples were already swaying to a string quartet. "Dance with me. We need to make this look real." He pulled me into his arms before I could protest, one hand at my waist, the other capturing my hand with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about him. We moved in time with the music, and for a moment, the rest of the room faded away. "Why did you really marry me?" I asked quietly. "And don't give me the protection speech. There had to be other ways. You want the truth?" His dark eyes held mine. "You remind me of someone I used to be. Before all this. Before the violence and the games and the constant calculating, you look at Sophia like she's worth saving, like there's still good in the world worth fighting for. I needed that. I needed someone who still believed that people like her, like us, could have something normal, even if it's a lie. It doesn't have to be a lie. Yes, it does." He spun me, and when I came back to him, he was closer than before. "Because men like Dmitri are right. This world destroys beautiful things, and you, Lena Torres, are the most beautiful thing I've seen in years. I'm going to ruin you just by keeping you close. That's why I asked how long before you run, because you should. The smart ones always do." The music swelled, and he dipped me, his face inches from mine. Every camera in the room was probably pointed at us, capturing this moment, cementing the fiction of our perfect marriage. But in his eyes, I saw something real: regret, longing, and a hunger that had nothing to do with power. When the song ended, he didn't let go immediately. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "Now you really are my wife, Lena, and that means there's no going back." I should have felt trapped. Instead, I felt alive. The mansion felt different when we returned that night, like something between us had shifted at the gala. Adrian didn't disappear into his office immediately like he usually did. Instead, he followed me to the balcony outside the family wing, where the city lights sparkled below us like fallen stars. "You did well tonight," he said, leaning against the railing beside me. I smiled and stayed quiet. Not exactly heroic. In that room, staying alive is heroic enough. He pulled off his tie, unbuttoning his collar, and I caught a glimpse of ink beneath his shirt tattoos I'd never seen before. Dmitri Corsini runs the human trafficking rings in the eastern districts. He came tonight to measure me, to see if I was vulnerable. And am I? Making you vulnerable? Devastatingly so. He turned to face me, and the moonlight cast shadows across his face that made him look almost human. "You want to know about my brother? About why I'm so paranoid about Sophia?" I nodded. Victor was my twin. We built this empire together, but he was reckless, cruel in ways I tried to temper. When Sophia's mother died, he wanted to use her, marry her off to a rival family for an alliance. She was 7 years old, and he saw her as currency. I refused. We fought. He lost. Adrian touched his scar. This was his parting gift. And when his own men killed him for his betrayal, I inherited everything, including the guilt. That's why you protect her so fiercely. That's why I'll destroy anyone who threatens her, including myself if it comes to that. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek in a touch so gentle I barely felt it. You're good for her, Lena. You make her laugh. You make her feel safe. That's worth more to me than you can possibly understand. And what about you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Who makes you feel safe? His expression changed, something vulnerable bleeding through the armor. No one, not in a long time. I didn't think. I just reached for him, my hand covering his where it still rested against my face. His skin was warm, his pulse racing under my fingers. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of something neither of us knew how to name. Then he pulled away. Don't fall for me, Lena, he said, and his voice was rough with something that sounded like pain. I don't survive love. It makes me weak, makes me sloppy. And in this world, weak men don't live long enough to regret it. He walked away, leaving me alone with the night and the terrible realization that I was already falling, and there was no way to stop. I should have listened to his warning. Instead, I started searching for answers. It began innocently enough. I wanted to understand the world I'd been dragged into, wanted to know what threats Sophia faced and why Adrian was so convinced that violence was the only language that mattered. But the mansion's library was sanitized, the internet was monitored, and the staff wouldn't answer questions that mattered. So I waited until late one night, when I knew Adrian was in the city for a meeting, and I slipped into the one place I'd been explicitly forbidden to enter, his private office. The door was locked, but I'd watched Mrs. Chen enter the security code enough times to memorize it. The room was dark except for the blue glow of computer screens, showing security feeds from every corner of the estate. I felt like an intruder in a sacred space, but I couldn't stop now. The desk was organized with military precision. I found folders marked with names I didn't recognize, financial records that made my eyes cross, and a locked drawer that I couldn't open. But the computer wasn't locked. Adrian had been in too much of a hurry, and he'd left himself logged in. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was betraying whatever fragile trust we'd built, but I clicked on the folder labeled Sophia Protection Protocol and started reading. What I found made my blood run cold. There were surveillance reports on me dating back weeks before I'd even applied for the job. Photos of me leaving my apartment, attending classes, buying groceries. They'd been watching me long before Mrs. Harlow ever bought me coffee. And in a subfolder labeled Marriage Clause, I found the truth. This whole thing had been planned from the beginning. Adrian hadn't trapped me on impulse. He'd chosen me specifically, a broke, desperate nursing student with no family ties, no powerful friends, someone who wouldn't be missed if things went wrong. The contract, the marriage, even the amount of the salary, it had all been calculated to manipulate me into saying yes. I was a solution to a legal problem, nothing more. You should have trusted me. I spun around, and Adrian was standing in the doorway, still in his coat, his expression unreadable. I hadn't heard him come home, hadn't heard him climb the stairs. He moved like a ghost when he wanted to. You were watching me before we ever met, I said, my voice shaking. This whole thing was a setup. Yes. His honesty surprised me more than a lie would have. He crossed the room, and I backed up until I hit the desk. He didn't touch me, just looked at me with those dark eyes that saw too much. I needed someone I could control, he said quietly. Someone without connections or resources to fight back. Someone who would agree to anything for the right price. You fit the profile perfectly. So I'm just a pawn. You were. He leaned closer, his hands bracketing me against the desk. Past tense. Because somewhere between the contract and tonight, you became something else. Something I didn't plan for. Something dangerous. What's that? Someone I care about. His confession hung in the air between us like a confession and a curse. And now they'll think you're my enemy. The people who were watching this house, the ones who monitor everything I do, they saw you break into my office. They'll report it to my rivals, and those rivals will assume you're either a spy or looking for leverage. Either way, you just became a target. The implications hit me like a physical blow. I didn't mean... I know. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone. But in this world, intentions don't matter. Only actions and consequences. You wanted answers, Lena? Here they are. I'm a monster who uses people to protect the only innocent thing in my life. And you're the tool I'm using to keep Sophia safe. That's the truth. Now you have to decide if you can live with it. I should have slapped him. Should have demanded he let me go. Instead, I met his eyes and asked, "What happens now?" Now I clean up the mess. And you stay where I can see you. Every hour of every day. Until I'm sure you're safe. No more freedom, no more privacy. Just me and you in this beautiful cage. He kissed me then, hard and angry and desperate. And I kissed him back with all the fury and fear and twisted affection I'd been trying to deny. It was a mistake and a revelation, a beginning and an ending, and when he finally pulled away, we were both breathing like we'd been running. "Go to bed," he said, his voice rough. "And Lena, next time you want answers, ask me. Breaking into my office could have gotten you killed." I left him standing there in the dark, surrounded by screens showing every corner of his empire, and I realized the truth. I wasn't his victim anymore. I was his accomplice, and that was so much worse. The storm hit 3 nights later, and it wasn't just the weather. Rain lashed against the windows as I paced my bedroom, feeling like the walls were closing in. Adrian had been true to his word. I hadn't been alone for a single moment since he'd caught me in his office. Guards outside my door, cameras tracking my every move, even Mrs. Chen checking on me hourly. The cage had gotten smaller, and I was suffocating. When the door opened without a knock and Adrian walked in, soaked from the rain and still in his coat, I knew something had broken. "We need to talk," he said. "Do we? Or do you need to deliver another list of rules?" His jaw tightened. Don't what? Don't be angry that you lied to me? Don't be furious that you're keeping me prisoner? Don't have feelings about the fact that you picked me out like I was furniture? You think I wanted this?" His voice rose, and I realized I'd never heard him shout before. "You think I enjoyed manipulating you? I did what I had to do to protect Sophia. That's it. Your feelings were never part of the equation. Then why do you care if I'm angry? Because you matter." The words exploded out of him. "Because somewhere in this mess, you became more than a solution to a problem. Because when I look at you, I don't see a tool or a pawn. I see someone who makes this house feel less like a tomb, and I hate that. I hate that I've become dependent on your smile, on your laugh, on the way Sophia lights up when you're around. You were supposed to be simple, Lena. You were supposed to stay in your box and play your role. But you didn't. And now I don't know what to do with you." The admission hung between us, raw and honest. "Let me go," I said, but my voice had lost its conviction. "No, Adrian, if you leave, you die. That's not a threat, it's a fact. Dmitry Corsini's people have been watching the mansion. They know your routines, know when you're most vulnerable. You walk out that door, and you'll be dead before you reach the city. Is that what you want? To prove a point? I want to stop feeling like I'm drowning, then learn to swim." He crossed the room, and suddenly, he was there, close enough to touch, his coat dripping rainwater onto the floor. "You want out of the cage? Fine. But you don't leave, you stay and fight. You stop being a victim and start being a partner. You want answers? Ask. You want control? Take it. But don't you dare give up on Sophia because you're angry at me. This isn't about Sophia." "Then what's it about?" "You." The word tore out of me. "It's about the fact that you terrify me and fascinate me in equal measure. It's about how I should hate you, but every time you're gentle with Sophia, or look at me like I'm more than a contract, I feel myself falling. And I can't fall for you, Adrian, because men like you don't catch people, you let them shatter." His expression shifted, something breaking behind his eyes. "You're right. I don't know how to do this, how to be what you need. I'm a weapon, Lena, not a man. I've spent my whole life learning how to destroy things, not build them. But for you, I'd try. I'd try to be something better, if you'd let me." I should have said no, should have walked away while I still could. Instead, I reached for him, pulling him down to me, and kissed him like he was oxygen, and I'd been drowning all along. The kiss was different from the one in his office, less anger, more hunger, a collision of need and desperation that made the world outside the storm disappear. His hands were in my hair, mine fisted in his wet coat, and we were both trying to communicate things we didn't have words for. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "Don't leave," he whispered. "Please don't leave." "I won't," I promised, and I meant it. But the universe had other plans. I heard the sound first tires on gravel, engines cutting out, voices speaking in rapid bursts. Adrian heard it too, his body going rigid against mine. He pulled away, his expression shifting from vulnerable to lethal in a heartbeat. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." "What's happening?" "I don't know, but I'm about to find out." He pulled a gun from somewhere under his coat and checked the chamber. "Lena, promise me. No matter what you hear, you stay in this room." "I promise." He kissed me once more, quick and fierce, and then he was gone. I locked the door and pressed my ear against it, listening to the sounds of the house erupting into chaos. Footsteps running, voices shouting, and then gunfire. Sharp cracks that made me flinch, followed by more shouting and the sound of breaking glass. My phone was useless, no signal. And anyway, who would I call? The police? They were probably on Adrian's payroll. My mother? She'd never understand. I was alone in a locked room while a war happened outside, and I'd never felt more helpless. Then the door burst open, not from the hallway, but from the balcony. Glass shattered, and men in black masks poured in, and I screamed, but no sound came out because one of them had his hand over my mouth. "Got her," he said into a radio. "Package secured. Exfil in 30 seconds. I fought. God, I fought. But they were trained, professional, and I was just a nursing student who'd made the mistake of falling in love with a monster. They zip-tied my hands, covered my head with a bag that smelled like chemicals, and carried me out into the storm. The last thing I heard before the drugs hit my system was Adrian's voice screaming my name. Then darkness. I woke up in hell. The room was concrete and cold, lit by a single bulb that swung from the ceiling. My hands were still bound, but they'd removed the hood. I was on a metal chair bolted to the floor, and across from me sat Dmitri Corsini, looking pleased with himself. "Mrs. Voss," he said, his accent making my name sound like an insult. "Welcome. I hope the accommodations are to your liking." "Where am I?" "An old warehouse near the docks. Very private, very isolated. Perfect for conversations that shouldn't be overheard." He stood and circled me slowly, like a shark evaluating prey. "Your husband has been very naughty. He's been interfering with my operations, costing me money and reputation. Normally, I'd simply kill him. But Adrian Voss is protected by too many alliances, too many dangerous friends, so instead, I'm going to hurt him in a way that matters. Through me. Through you." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "Do you? I know what the Corsini family does, Mrs. Voss. We trade in flesh. And you young, beautiful, connected to power, you'll fetch an extraordinary price. By tomorrow, you'll be on a ship to somewhere that doesn't believe in rescue, and Adrian will spend the rest of his short life knowing he couldn't save you." Terror clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "He'll come for me. I'm counting on it. This warehouse is wired with enough explosives to level a city block. When he arrives, and he will arrive, because men like Adrian are predictable, when you threaten what they love, he'll walk into a trap. I'll get revenge, a profit, and the satisfaction of watching the great Adrian Voss die trying to save a woman who is always just a means to an end." "You're wrong," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "He doesn't love me. I'm a contract, remember? A legal convenience. You almost believe that." Dmitri laughed. "But I've seen the way he looks at you, Mrs. Voss. I saw it at the gala. That's not convenience, that's weakness. And weakness is always profitable. He left me there in the dark, and I finally let myself cry. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had stopped meaning anything. I tested the zip ties until my wrists bled, screamed until my voice gave out, prayed to gods I wasn't sure I believed in. And I thought about Adrian, about the way he'd kissed me in the storm, about his promise to try to be better. I'd told him not to fall for me because he didn't survive love, but I hadn't listened to my own advice. The explosion came without warning, a deafening roar that shook the walls and knocked the light from the ceiling. For a moment, everything was chaos. Dust, debris, the sound of automatic weapons firing. Then, through the smoke, I saw him. Adrian, covered in blood and moving like death itself, a gun in each hand and murder in his eyes. Behind him came Marcus and a dozen other men, all armed, all focused on one thing, getting me out. "Lena." He was at my side in seconds, cutting my bonds with a knife, checking me for injuries with hands that shook despite the violence around us. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Adrian, this is a trap. I know. He pulled me to my feet, shielding me with his body as bullets ricocheted off metal. Doesn't matter. I'm getting you out. We ran through a maze of corridors, bodies falling around us, Adrian's men providing cover while he dragged me toward an exit I couldn't see. Somewhere behind us, Dimitri was screaming orders, and I realized this was it. This was the moment where everything ended, one way or another. Then Adrian stopped, pushing me toward Marcus. Get her to the car. What are you doing? I grabbed his arm, refusing to let go. Finishing this. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of everything he'd never said out loud. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Adrian, please. He kissed me, hard and fast and desperate. You're my only weakness, Lena, but you're also the only thing that makes me want to survive. Now go. Marcus pulled me away, and I watched Adrian turn back toward the warehouse, toward Dimitri, and the trap and the explosives that would kill him if he wasn't careful. I screamed his name, but Marcus was stronger, and he carried me out into the night. The car was waiting. We drove away just as the warehouse erupted in flames, and I felt my heart stop because I was sure, absolutely certain, that Adrian was still inside. We'd made it 3 blocks when I heard the voice on Marcus's radio. Target neutralized. Boss is secure. Heading to the rendezvous point. Adrian was alive. I didn't breathe properly again until I saw him at the safe house, bloodied but breathing, being patched up by a doctor who didn't ask questions. When his eyes found mine across the room, I felt something inside me break and rebuild all at once. He'd risked everything. For me. And that changed everything. The safe house was a nondescript building in a neighborhood where people knew better than to ask questions. Adrian had taken a bullet to the shoulder, and another that had grazed his ribs, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. The doctor finished stitching him up and left with a warning about infection and rest that Adrian immediately ignored. You should be in a hospital, I said, sitting beside him on the couch while he tried not to wince. Hospitals ask questions. I don't like questions. He looked at me, really looked, his eyes cataloging every bruise and cut. Did they hurt you? Nothing permanent. Adrian, Dimitri said. Dimitri's dead, along with most of his senior people. The rest are scrambling to avoid the vacuum. It's handled. You killed him. I killed everyone in that building. He said it without emotion, like he was discussing the weather. They took you, Lena. They put their hands on my wife. There's no forgiveness for that. No mercy. His wife. Not his fake wife. Not his legal convenience. Just his wife. Plain and simple. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. Why? I asked. Why risk a war? Risk everything? For me? You said I was just a solution to a problem. I lied. His hand found mine, lacing our fingers together. From the moment you signed that contract, you stopped being a solution and became a complication. And then you met Sophia, and you looked at her like she was worth fighting for. And I realized you were looking at me the same way. Like I could be saved. Like I deserved to be. No one's ever looked at me like that before. Adrian. I'm not good, Lena. I've done things that would make you run if you knew the details. But with you, I want to be better. I want to be the man you think I am when you smile at me, even if it's impossible. Before I could respond, the door opened, and a police officer walked in, not just any officer, but a detective I recognized from the news. Homicide Division, with a reputation for taking down organized crime families. Mr. Voss, the detective said, his tone professionally neutral. Mrs. Voss, I need statements about tonight's events. Adrian's expression shifted, becoming the cold, calculating man the world knew. My lawyers will be in touch. I'm afraid it's not that simple. There are bodies, Mr. Voss. A warehouse full of them. And witnesses who say you were there. Self-defense, Adrian replied smoothly. My wife was kidnapped by Dimitri Corsini, a known human trafficker. I rescued her. If his men died in the process, that's on them. The detective turned to me. Mrs. Voss, is that accurate? This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I could tell the truth that Adrian ran a criminal empire, that he'd manipulated me into marriage, that the warehouse was the culmination of a gang war. I could expose everything, buy my freedom with his imprisonment, and walk away clean. Or I could lie. I thought about Sophia, about how she'd finally started sleeping through the night, about the way she called me Aunt Lena now and drew pictures of us as a family. I thought about Adrian comforting her through nightmares, about the way he'd kissed me in the storm, about how he'd walked into a trap because I mattered more than his own survival. I thought about the choice that would define who I became, victim or accomplice, prisoner or partner. My husband saved my life, I said, meeting the detective's eyes without flinching. Those men kidnapped me, threatened me, and would have killed me if Adrian hadn't come. Everything he did was to protect me. That's the truth. The detective studied me for a long moment, and I knew he didn't believe me. But he also knew he couldn't prove otherwise, not without my testimony, and I'd just made it clear whose side I was on. "I'll need you both to come in for formal statements," he said finally. "Tomorrow. And Mrs. Voss, if you ever change your mind about that story, my door is always open." He left, and Adrian and I sat in silence, the weight of what I'd just done settling over us like a blanket. "You just made yourself an accessory," he said quietly. "There's no walking away now." "I know. You should have told the truth, should have saved yourself. You saved me first." I turned to face him, taking his hands in mine. "And anyway, who says I want to walk away? Maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He pulled me close, careful of his injuries, and I felt his heart beating against mine, steady, strong, alive. We'd crossed a line tonight, burned bridges I couldn't rebuild, and chosen each other over everything else. It should have felt like a mistake. Instead, it felt like coming home. 3 weeks later, I stood in the mansion gardens, watching Sophia chase butterflies in the late afternoon sun. The world had shifted since the warehouse Adrian's rivals had scattered, new alliances had been formed, and the Voss name carried even more weight than before. But inside these walls, in this garden, things felt almost normal. Sophia had started calling me Mama last week. I'd cried for an hour. "You look peaceful," Adrian said, appearing beside me with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. The scars from the warehouse were healing, but they'd leave marks, physical proof of the night he'd chosen me over safety. "I am peaceful," I admitted. "Is that strange? Considering everything? Considering you're married to a monster?" "A little," he smiled, and it was real, the kind of smile I'd fought so hard to earn. "But I'll take it. You're not a monster. I'm trying not to be, for you, for Sophia, for whatever future we're building here." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "I never thanked you. For lying to the police. For staying. You don't have to thank me for choosing my family." The word hung in the air between us, family. Not fake, not convenient, not contracted. Just true. Sophia ran up to us, her hands full of flowers and her smile brighter than the sun. "Look, I picked these for you, Mama." I took the bouquet, feeling my heart expand in ways I'd never thought possible. This child, this man, this strange and dangerous life, it was mine. All of it. "They're beautiful, sweetheart," I said, kissing her forehead. "Just like you." She ran off again, and Adrian tightened his arms around me. "I love you," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear. "I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but it's true. You walked into my life as a solution and became the whole damn point." I turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd trapped me, protected me, and somehow set me free. "I love you too, even though you're terrible at communication and you solve problems with violence and you manipulated me into marriage. I'll spend the rest of my life making that up to you. Good, because you're stuck with me now." We kissed there in the garden, Sophia's laughter providing the soundtrack, and for the first time since I'd signed that contract, I felt like I could breathe. Then Marcus appeared at the gate, holding an envelope with an expression that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Voss," he said, handing it to me. "This just arrived, courier delivery. It's marked urgent." I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. My name was written across the front in elegant script, and beneath it, a single line that made the world tilt. Asterisk. From the desk of Victor Voss. Asterisk, Adrian's dead brother. I looked at Adrian, saw the color drain from his face, and knew that whatever peace we'd found was about to be tested again. But this time, we'd face it together. I opened the envelope, Adrian reading over my shoulder, and the first line made my blood run cold. Asterisk. Dear sister-in-law, I hope this letter finds you well. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, and I've been watching your relationship with my brother with great interest. It's time we met. Properly, I have a proposition that will benefit us all. Regards, Victor. Sophia called my name from across the garden, oblivious to the storm gathering around us. Adrian's hand found mine, his grip tight enough to hurt. And I realized the story wasn't over, it was just beginning. But I wasn't the scared nursing student anymore. I wasn't the victim or the pawn or the convenient solution. I was Mrs. Adrian Voss, partner to a king, protector of a queen, and whatever came next, we'd handle it together. Because in this house, love wasn't a weakness. It was the most dangerous weapon of all.